Okay, so what I've got here is I'm actually going to use our customer demo environment. So I think we've actually given you a card so you can actually sign up and get one of these desktops and try it out and use it. So I'm at the mercy of everybody else who's currently playing in my environment testing desktops. We've got about 200 people running across 3 or 4 servers. So we're in a live environment. We can show you, the kind of user experience that we can expect. So, we've talked about some of the capacity savings and IO optimization, but it doesn't mean anything if you're not giving a benefit to the end user, right? And a lot of the VDI is about giving the end user the experience, at the same time saving the business that value in the storage and whatever else you're doing to it. So what I've got here is a couple of demonstrations of end user experience. The first one is we're going to set it going. It's called performance test. And it's basically going to go and stress the disk. So it's going to chuck a bunch of random IO to the back end and then deliver me a score. And we're going to compare that to a number of other disks. I'm only really interested in this environment in what the disk's doing. So we're going to run all of the disk tests. At the same time, we can actually look at what this test is doing at the back end. So we can actually see some of the IO that's happening. We can look at IOPS that's going on. So you can see here that we've already pulled nearly 31,000 IOPS from running this test. So we'll let this run. It'll come back with a score in a minute. And we'll do a bit of analysis on that. But at the same time, I'm also going to kick off this. So this is actually going to run 7 or 8 apps all at the same time. And you can see here that they've all launched. They're all pretty much interactive. I can start changing numbers and words and stuff. So I've just launched 7 or 8 applications that even on my MacBook Air, wherever it is, would have taken a minute, 2 minutes to start running. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're doing. And now, this is one desktop out of 70, 80 on the same server. So we're starting to compartmentalize that resource and provide that 70 desktops. So as we start to scale out, we're now doing that on a server by server basis. So if I was on a different server, I get exactly the same user experience. So I'm not reliant on the underlying storage being able to deliver me 40,000 IOPS and do that. I can deliver that from this single server. So if we go back to our perf1 test here, you can see that if I compare this, I've got 2 other disks. One's a traditional spinning disk sat inside, I think it's a Dell Optiplex. And the other one's an Apple SSD, which pretty much mimics what's inside my MacBook Air today. So you can see that I'm nearly just over 4 times quicker than a MacBook Air, and I'm running in a virtualized environment. So that's really the power that I can bring from storage optimization software to a VDI environment.
One question I'll ask for that is, we're kind of seeing a perfect scenario here. Not that I'm discounting what you've got, but
sure.
What if I'd love to see that same hardware platform that you're hosting on your ILIO on without ILIO running, and what does that graph actually look like? Like same hardware spec, what would it look like if you didn't have your acceleration in place?
So it would be equivalent. I mean, this is running on top of a very old NetApp with 10, 12 disks in it. So you'd be somewhere probably between that single spinning disk and the MacBook Air. But it's not about, it's a lot about, yes, you can compare it to that. And even in my environment that I've got, I'm not cash rich, so I'm given a budget and you get to do it. But even if you look at it compared to, a blazingly fast piece of storage, it's about delivering user experience, but about offloading that. So, ideally I'd be able to put 5 times more compute around that same storage platform. So yes, that underlying storage platform, if it was empty, may be able to give this to me. But what I'm doing is optimizing that and making it do more work for me and giving me more benefit in the background.
Yeah, when you see the reduction in speed is really when you scale out. So if you have a storage array and you're running 10 desktops against a $100,000 storage array, you might get the same number. But when you do 1,000 users or 2,000 users, you're going to be dividing up the total IOPS of that array by 1,000. And you might, so if you do a typical reference architecture in VDI is in the 10 to 12 IOP range these days. If you constrain this test in the hypervisor to 10 to 12 IOPS, that same number that's 4,000 there is something like 50. I've done that before quite a few times, and we actually have a little tool in the demo desktops where you can constrain it.
Yeah, and the other thing to start thinking about is when you start looking at 70, 80, 900 VMs running on a blade, we're giving you 40,000 IOPS, right? So we can share that. So 200 to 300 IOPS a desktop. Now, if you take a desktop and limit it to 50 IOPS, which is being generous for what people say you need for VDI, and try that. You can go to vCenter and say, just give me 50 IOPS, then see what the user experience is like for that. And it's not about that steady state IO that you get, it's about that peak to 3,500 IOPS as I launch Excel or I launch Word. So that's really where we're giving you the performance.
So inside this, inside your host, you've got the data store, which is stored in the physical host's RAM,
Yep.
And then this VHDX representing the VDI desktop is also in the RAM. Is that, what, 70 gigabytes of RAM? Or what?
So this is, yeah, I mean, I've got a server with 256 gig of RAM. I've taken about 80 gig of that and turned that into a data store and presented that back to the hypervisor. I'm then placing, I've got about 60 VMs running on here at the moment, 70 VMs running on here at the moment, and I'm deduplicating that down. So I'm only using about half of that environment at the moment.
Yeah, the typical amount of RAM per desktop is 600 megabytes. So you can kind of calculate that out. A lot of our reference architectures are usually with 256 gig of RAM hosts with 40 to 80 gigs of RAM. That's typical.
So that's for pure in memory. So that's using memory as my primary platform of storage. If I'm talking about putting, a tiered approach where I'm using memory to optimize my storage, and so rely on underlying physical storage for primary storage, then typically I'll be using somewhere between 20 and 30 gigs of RAM. So a relatively small amount to be able to deliver this type of performance.
And are you seeing that driving a reduction in the configured RAM on the virtual machine on the desktop VM? So there's less.
Yeah. So there's always this. Yeah. There's this challenge between what does a user expect? So if you suddenly gave a user with, Windows 7 will run quite happily on this with 1.5 gigs of RAM. I think I've got 2 at the moment. But if you give them something with 1.5 and they see 1.5, they go, I haven't got enough memory. Irrespective of the performance or anything else, it's that perception thing, right? So some of that is retraining. So in certain environments, we're starting to see people do the other thing of overcommit. So where you can do that, you can balloon in ESX, for example. We're actually starting to see overcommitting on memory to fool somebody the other way around, right? Tell the server that it's got more resource than it really has, rather than the user giving them less. So we're starting to see that as well.
Where does the number 5x come out of? You mentioned 5x, of course, and is that best case scenario? What's typical?
So I'd say 5x is pretty average for VDI. We're seeing up to 10x. If you take a stateless environment, then you may well see 10x.
Oh, okay.
So somewhere between that sort of range. But it's very environment dependent. But yeah, I mean, an 80% offload of I/O and capacity is a good number to put your finger in the air for.
What about CPU usage on the host side? Because to do the duplication and so on, the virtual machine.
So in this environment, we'll give the ILIO plants 2 virtual CPUs, and we'll actually reserve one of them.
Okay.
And so what we're doing is saying, give us 2, so we'll use it when it's free. And if the system becomes CPU bound, reserve 1 for me. Because I'm delivering your I/O, I don't want to impact that I/O as well. So we'll put some best practice around the resource that we give to that virtual appliance.
So if you're lowering the configured amount of memory for the virtual machines, I'm assuming they'll start paging.
Yep.
But you really don't care.
We don't care because we're doing that into
paging to the memory.
Paging to memory anyway.
Cool.
And from a Hyper-V's perspective, so you're putting the CSV in RAM, the clustered shared volume, or?
Yep. So we can build a cluster shared volume and then place the VHD. So we're building a cluster shared volume, or we're building a just a drive back out onto Hyper-V.
Right.
So we can do different architectures.
SMB3 now? SMB3 now to do that as natively shared rather than the nasty overlay on NTFS that is CSV?
So
that's actually something that we're doing in the USX product now, which is bringing in an SMB3. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But today what happens in a Hyper-V VDI environment is it really gets presented as an iSCSI block data store with NTFS getting on top of it, like you mentioned. Yeah.